Hi class, this is the first of my videos. You're going to find quite a few of these in the course this semester because I'm teaching this class for the first time online, and I'm trying to find a way where I can communicate my reactions to the selections that I'm having you read. It's a little hard to do that just in writing. So I'm going to make videos and I'm going to talk about some of the things that I hope that you see as you're reading. And also I'm going to add some things that you may not have seen to try to enrich your understanding of the stories. The first story I'm going to talk about is Linda Brewer's 2020. If you read the introductory material, you realize that when we're talking about fiction, we have to consider certain elements of that fiction so that we can see how ideas are addressed and how they're brought forth for our understanding. And so the first thing I'll do when I'm reading a story is I'll just try to read it and not think about the author and not think about when it was written or anything, just to see how the story stands on its own 2 feet, so to speak. We call this a deep reading. It's a part of a kind of critical analysis called new criticism, and it basically posits the idea that the text should stand by itself and show you everything that it needs to show you to get its ideas across. As you can see behind me, I have plenty of books, and those are just a few of the books that I have in my home. I love to read, and I know that some of you don't, so I want to try to make this a little bit more pleasurable for you by saying right off the bat that each person's interpretation has validity. And we can talk about the many different ways that we can show that, but I want to just say what I suggest to you is only one of the ways that you can make meaning out of the text. You'll bring your own ideas, and they are valid. What we want to move toward, though, is statements that can be made that show, that have support from the story. We want to be able to make a statement and then go back to the story or the poem or the play and be able to show why we came to the conclusions that we did. And new criticism also involves something called the unity of the story. You might call it a thesis. That unity has to do with the way all those different elements come together. So what jumps out at me when I'm reading the story 2020 by Linda Brewer? Well, one of the things that jumps out is there's only 2 people here, and it's a very short selection. It basically follows these 2 people getting in a car and driving across country. The story is also told basically from Bill's point of view. His companion in the car is Ruthie. They are 2 people who just sort of met each other, and they both needed to get to a certain place, and so they decided to carpool all the way across the country. Now, Bill narrates the story, but not from the first person point of view. He actually tells the story, we get the story through this limited omniscient narrator. That means this narrator can go inside Bill's head, but also see what Bill is doing and what Ruthie is doing and tell us those things. And because we see it from Bill's point of view, and we think he may be our protagonist or the person whose story we follow, then we have to think about what conclusions he's coming to. And in the beginning of the story, he doesn't think very much of Ruthie. He finds her to be surprising. She's not like the girls that he knows who argue a lot. She's just pleasant to be around, but he thinks she's a little goofy. He even questions her sanity at one point. By the end of the story, we want to ask ourselves, is this how the story, is this where it leaves us? Is Ruthie someone who's just totally off the wall, and Bill is just sharing his story about having ridden with someone that's sort of crazy? Well, I think the key element to every piece of fiction is that there is some sort of shift. Some character changes or something changes, so that the problems that are occurring are either resolved or they can never be resolved. We call this the climax of the story. And at some point here, Bill and Ruthie sort of shift roles. Bill is still narrating the story, but he no longer thinks the bad things that he's thinking about Ruthie. And I'll just point out a couple of lines that jump out at me, because when we're doing new criticism or a close reading, we're trying to look for evidence in the story to prove that what we claim about it is true. And I need to prove that there's a shift and that Bill no longer feels the way that he did originally about Ruthie, even though Ruthie's behavior gets more and more and more bizarre. She actually sees visions. And at first Bill is bothered by this, but as time goes on, some of the things that she says compliment Bill. And so he finds himself a little bit more able to accept what she says. And a couple of lines here, Bill notices at the beginning on page 17 that she looks out in a certain state and she sees Indian paintbrush. Bill doesn't believe that Indian paintbrush can grow in that state. So he's concerned about Ruthie's mental state and maybe about his own situation, because he's in the car with her for many days. The next evening, Ruthie starts driving, and so she says, "I never thought I'd see Bigfoot in real life." And of course, most of us don't believe that Bigfoot exists. If he does, we don't have documented evidence of it. So we, like Bill, might question Ruthie's sanity at this point. Finally, she ends up saying, "I'm so glad I got to come with you." Her eyes were big and blue and capable of seeing wonderful sights. So now Bill no longer thinks that they're weird or unexpected or unbelievable. He thinks they're wonderful sights. She sees a white buffalo in Fargo, and she sees a UFO in Twin Falls. Now, we as the reader may believe that she's really lost her mind, that she's off her rocker. But why then does Bill end up saying about the last vision, why does he end up letting it ride? One of the things that she says is she sees a handsome genius in the person of Bill himself. Now, the old adage is flattery will get you everywhere. And in the course of this drive, I will claim that Bill starts falling for her. And even though she's still seeing very strange events and visions, Bill is okay with that now, because one of those strange things that she sees is that he's a genius. And he probably isn't a genius. In fact, he's pretty judgmental, and he's kind of a typical, the guy you don't want to get involved with, because he doesn't seem to accept things very well. But by the end of this story, he's accepting Ruthie. We have to ask ourselves, what's going on here? This girl is a college student. Is she really off her rocker? Or is she playing Bill? Is she finding a way to compliment him and get him to accept really ridiculous things, thereby making fun of him in a way that he doesn't even understand? So that's kind of where I end up by the end of the story. Go back to that story and see if there are other ways to read it, ways that you can support with your own details that you find in the story. For me, the unity of the story is the discovery that Ruthie is well above Bill's thinking capacity, and she is playing a game with him kind of in a mean-spirited way. Okay,